In the next few minutes, you're going to grasp why a quiet, deliberate retreat from romantic relationships is taking place among a growing population of men, not out of bitterness or emotional collapse, but from a clarity that cuts deeper than most can handle. Søren Kierkegaard once warned that the greatest threat to life isn't death, but the erasure of one's own identity. Yet even he likely never imagined a world where men would relinquish love willingly, not to escape pain, but to preserve the last fragment of themselves still untouched. Take, for instance, a man we'll call Daniel. He's 28, works at a prestigious law firm, has a tailored suit for every day of the week, and looks like someone who walked out of a modern-day success manual. On paper, he's everything the culture celebrates. But at night, he returns to a home filled with silence, not due to failure, not due to rejection, but by conscious decision. He's part of a movement you won't find on the news or in viral videos, a quiet, expanding undercurrent of men who have stared into the mechanisms of modern love and chosen to walk away. This isn't driven by hatred, it's not revenge. It's something icier, something final, a resignation that no longer pleads for understanding or argues its reasons. It just exits, because deep beneath this decision lies an awareness, the kind Kierkegaard called despair, not the sudden scream of trauma, but the slow deterioration of meaning. And modern love, as it is packaged today, often accelerates that erosion. Recent academic research reveals that men are now 50% less likely to pursue relationships than men of the previous generation. A groundbreaking study from the American Sociological Review reports that over 1/3 of men under 30 reported no sexual contact in the past year, a level of abstention not seen in decades. But this is not about intimacy. It's about an emotional starvation, a profound void where purpose used to reside. Let's go back a couple of centuries. In 19th century Denmark, Kierkegaard penned an allegory about a man who fell deeply in love, only to realize that entering into marriage would annihilate the very desire that brought the love into existence. He described this as a kind of paradox, when the attempt to preserve passion through structure ends up destroying it. That irony hasn't vanished. If anything, it has metastasized. Men today are living out Kierkegaard's nightmare in real time. Data from psychological journals reveal that for many men, joy within marriage diminishes sharply after the first 12 months, while for women, satisfaction tends to hold steady. It's a troubling split. Why? Because many men feel they must amputate significant parts of their inner world just to fit the shape society demands they take on as partners. There is no contract. There is only transformation, and not the good kind. In fact, deeper surveys have uncovered that men who remain single and without children report higher levels of contentment than their married peers. Let that simmer for a second. The very path men are told will bring fulfillment, marriage, family, commitment, is the one most correlated with a gradual loss of joy. Kierkegaard anticipated this tension. Whether you marry or don't, he mused, you will regret it. The paradox doesn't come from indecisiveness. It emerges from clarity, a recognition that either path demands a sacrifice, but only one lets you keep your core intact. Now enter betrayal. Imagine sacrificing evenings, weekends, and your own mental health to build a life you believed was shared, only to have it all taken from you by court rulings or quiet departures. The heartbreak is not just about loss, it's about the realization that love can be revoked not because of failure, but simply because she no longer felt it. A Cornell study revealed that nearly 70% of divorces are initiated by women, often citing vague dissatisfaction rather than infidelity or abuse. Kierkegaard referred to this as the despair of possibilities, a cruel awareness that no matter how much you give, it may never be enough to secure permanence. And so, some men, after seeing this cycle play out, refuse to spin the wheel at all. But don't mistake them for cowards. These aren't men running from love. They're men who have survived it. Men who've looked into its machinery and discovered that the only way to stay sane is to walk away. They are not failures. They are scouts, explorers who've wandered beyond the mapped territory of romantic validation and found something else entirely. Consider the story of Michael, a 32-year-old architect who, not long ago, was on the floor of his unfurnished apartment, staring at an engagement ring he would never give. His fiancée had left him with 5 words: "I just don't feel it." At first he tried what he was told to try. He numbed himself, he distracted, he forced a smile. Then one night he picked up Kierkegaard's Fear and Trembling, and a line struck like thunder: "The knight of faith must walk alone." That sentence did something irreversible. Michael stopped searching for someone to complete him. He stopped mistaking relationships for healing. And in the silence that followed, he did what few dare to do. He confronted the emptiness. Within 12 months, he had traveled to over a dozen countries, launched a business that tripled his income, and more importantly, discovered the one lesson men are rarely taught. Solitude is not isolation. It is integration. A 2023 psychological review found that men who chose voluntary seclusion for 6 months or longer reported massive increases in mental clarity, emotional resilience, and creative output. Kierkegaard described this as the leap of faith, a moment of surrender not to another person, but to one's own sovereignty. And this leap is not rare in history. Time and again, some of the world's most groundbreaking contributions came from men who had their hearts shattered, but refused to stay broken. Friedrich Nietzsche, rejected by Lou Andreas Salome, channeled his anguish into "Thus Spoke Zarathustra." Beethoven, unable to hear and suffering from heartbreak, composed the most enduring music in human history. Kierkegaard himself, after ending his engagement, entered the most prolific chapter of his life. There is a rhythm here, a sequence that modern psychology now tracks. According to a 2021 study from Harvard, men who processed romantic rejection by redirecting their energy into creative or intellectual disciplines were statistically more likely to achieve outstanding results, far more than those who simply moved on and sought another partner. But there's a dangerous moment in this evolution, a realization that the world doesn't actually want men to become self-sufficient. Why? Because a man who doesn't need emotional dependency to feel whole is almost impossible to manipulate. He stops buying things to impress. He stops tolerating disrespect. He stops chasing a carrot that was never meant to feed him. As Kierkegaard might say, he becomes a lone arrow, released from the bow, flying with no promise of return. Take the story of David. Once a high-powered lawyer making 6 figures, he lost nearly everything in a divorce. Instead of rebuilding the same life, he built a new one. He moved to a cabin in Montana and began writing candid essays on masculinity and grief. In a year, his work had reached hundreds of thousands of men. They didn't praise him for success. They thanked him for saying out loud what they were too afraid to admit. The media called him extreme, but the truth was simpler. He had discovered that what society calls madness is often just clarity no longer disguised. Kierkegaard wrote of this moment, the dizziness of freedom, when a man no longer clings to societal expectations and instead finds a terrifying, exhilarating power in creating his own path. A 2022 psychological study confirmed what Kierkegaard intuited over a century ago. Men who voluntarily disengage from romantic pursuit demonstrate increased cognitive focus, stronger decision-making abilities, and greater willingness to take bold personal risks. But here's where it turns again. What happens when a man, after years of solitude, is faced with the thing he turned away from? What happens when love appears, not as a demand but as an echo? Meet Elias, a 36-year-old former banker who abandoned the chaos of his former life and moved to a quiet town by the sea. For years he lived with ritual and rhythm, morning swims, books by candlelight. He believed he had sealed off that part of himself forever. Then one day, a woman sat near him at a cafe. She didn't speak. She didn't flirt. But something about the calm way she turned the pages of her book, slow, present, broke something open inside him. Kierkegaard had warned of this too. Once you define yourself, the universe will test that definition. Elias had defined himself as a man immune to romance, but in her silence he heard a challenge, not to fall in love, but to question whether he was still alive to it. This is where the paradox begins. Because when a man truly lets go of needing love, when he ceases to chase, it doesn't vanish. It mutates, becomes something heavier. A desire for authenticity, not performance. A hunger for presence, not validation. A 2023 report in the Archives of Sexual Behavior found that men who had withdrawn from romantic activity for more than 2 years displayed a profound shift in what they found attractive. It was no longer about charm or status. It was about depth, stillness, a sense that the other person wasn't just looking for a mirror, but a companion. Kierkegaard once wrote that true love alters itself, not the other. And that's the difference. A man who's healed alone doesn't crave a woman who completes him. He wants one who walks beside him, not as a rescuer, not as an obligation, but as an equal soul. Yet that creates a different problem. Because most people, raised on a diet of fairy tales and digital dopamine, are not ready for that kind of stillness. A man who doesn't ask to be needed is often perceived as cold. A man who sets boundaries is seen as unromantic. But really, he's just someone who has reclaimed his center and refuses to hand it over again. And that perhaps is the most dangerous kind of man of all. Now we enter the uncharted territory few are willing to talk about. The moment when a woman finally meets this man. The man who has no holes to fill, no emotional debts to pay, no mask to keep on. A man who has walked through the fire of solitude and come out not burnt, but refined. Meet Leo, a former Marine turned wilderness instructor. 7 years after his marriage collapsed, he vanished from society's radar, building a life of purposeful exile among pine and snow. His days were measured not in emails or meetings, but in axe swings, breathwork, and survival. Then, on a quiet morning in a small Denver bookstore, a woman approached him, not to flirt, not to seduce, but to ask with genuine curiosity if he could recommend anything by Kierkegaard. Leo said it wasn't her face, her tone, or even the question that struck him. It was that she asked nothing from him. And for a man who had spent years shedding expectations, that felt like oxygen. They've been together for 4 years, no shared mortgage, no joint social media, no wedding plans. Just 2 people who meet in the middle of their own lives, not to complete each other, but to witness. That's the secret most men never learn. Love doesn't require the destruction of self. The ancients understood this. The Stoics, the Spartans, the samurai. To love from a place of power is not to control or to please. It's to offer yourself unfragmented, without disguise. Kierkegaard circled this truth again and again. In one of his lesser-known works of love, he wrote, "To love is to stand in direct relation to the eternal. And what is more eternal than the man who has survived his own disillusionment? But we must not forget, the world is not yet built to receive such a man. The algorithms, the dating guides, the cultural noise, they're tuned to seek providers, entertainers, protectors, not pilgrims. A 2022 analysis of online dating behavior showed that the vast majority of women under 35 were less likely to match with men who described themselves as independent, private, or self-sufficient. Why? Because he seems like he doesn't need anyone. And he doesn't. Not in the way the storybooks taught us to need. He no longer desires to be rescued or celebrated. He doesn't want applause. He wants presence. This is where modern love fractures under the weight of its illusions. Kierkegaard once wrote, "The unhappy lover remembers. The happy one forgets. But the awakened man he observes. And that observation kills the fantasy." Because now we reach the final, most unsettling twist. What happens when love knocks at the door of a man who no longer depends on it to feel whole? When it comes not with chains, but with wings? The answer isn't easy. Because the moment he sees love without its disguises, he also sees its cost. There's a term in modern psychology, post-romantic clarity. It describes a phase after a prolonged absence from relationships, where the person no longer views love through the lens of old desires. A 2021 study tracked over 1,200 men who had lived without romance for at least 5 years. The results were striking. Nearly 70% said that when they re-entered the dating world, their preferences had changed completely. They no longer prioritized looks or status. They sought only one thing: peace. Not passive comfort, not complacency, but a partnership that asked nothing of them that they hadn't already given to themselves. Kierkegaard wrote, "To love another is to will to be oneself in her presence." That's the standard now, and it's one that many are unprepared to meet, because it requires the end of performance, the death of bargaining, the courage to say, "This is who I am, with or without you." Let me tell you about Victor. Victor was a neuroscientist who had spent the better part of his life chasing dreams handed to him by others. 2 divorces, a near suicide, and a mental breakdown later, he retreated into the only place left: himself. For 5 years he lived as a monk of the mind, training in martial arts by night, writing obscure philosophical journals by day, and reading Kierkegaard at dawn. Then, just when his healing seemed complete, life brought someone unexpected. A woman, brilliant, self-contained, and utterly uninterested in saving him, entered his life not as a savior, but as a sovereign. And Victor, knowing the old game by heart, did the unthinkable. He let her go, not because he was afraid, not because he was incapable of love, but because he recognized the price of re-entering a story that wasn't his anymore. This is the threshold most men fear, not the pain of loneliness, the pain of knowing that accepting love might mean surrendering the ground they bled to stand on. Kierkegaard called this the suspension of the ethical, the willingness to abandon what is expected in order to remain true to what is sacred. It's the difference between being a martyr for connection and a guardian of the soul. And the truth is, we've known this instinct since ancient times. In 15th century Scotland, a nobleman was invited to dine with the king, an apparent truce after years of tension. Halfway through the feast, a black bull's head was dropped onto the table, a signal for execution. The nobleman was dragged outside and beheaded. The message? Not all invitations are sanctuaries. Modern men live this story in reverse. They enter relationships under the illusion of peace, only to discover expectations written in invisible ink. Serve, sacrifice, support, but do not falter, do not ask, do not retreat. And so they leave, not in rage, not in revenge, in remembrance of something ancient, something truer. Anthropologists studying the Hema tribe of Namibia found something peculiar in 2023. When given the choice between successful hunters and those who failed more often, women consistently chose the latter. Why? because the less successful hunters spent more time telling stories, mentoring the young, and laughing with elders. The tribe had a word for it, okurumba, the art of being wholly alive beyond metrics. Kierkegaard hinted at this in Stages on Life's Way. The door to happiness opens outward. You cannot seize joy, you can only invite it. The modern man stepping back from love isn't becoming cold. He's learning not to trade his warmth for approval. He's remembering what wholeness feels like in silence, in solitude, in stillness. And now we see the ripple. According to a 2025 Pew Research study, over 40% of never-married men under 40 now define themselves as romantically disengaged, not angry, not loveless, just unhooked. And these men, contrary to every doomsday narrative, are building, volunteering more, writing more, creating more art, reporting deeper purpose. They've become what Kierkegaard called teleological rebels, those willing to break the moral norms of society in order to answer a higher calling. The dating world is catching on too. A 300% surge in profiles requesting Kierkegaardian men, defined by introspection, quiet strength, and emotional restraint, has been noted across major platforms. The less they pursue, the more they're pursued. The less they attach, the more valuable they become. And so we must ask, is this a death or a rebirth? Has love ended or simply shed its costume? Let's go back to the 1970s. In a famous experiment, researchers placed baby monkeys in a room with two artificial mothers, one made of cold wire that dispensed food, the other soft and warm, but offering no sustenance. Every monkey chose warmth over nourishment. The lesson? Creatures crave comfort over reward. Modern men are choosing the cloth mother, not in women necessarily, but in life itself. They are turning toward things that offer meaning over survival, the embrace of purpose, the stillness of brotherhood, the fire of creation. Kierkegaard knew this ache, the ache to love something real, not a fantasy, not a role, something eternal. And where does this leave us? At the frontier. A generation of men standing on the edge of something no one taught them to face, what it means to love truth more than comfort, what it means to become the man you were meant to be, even if no one claps, even if no one comes. Friedrich Nietzsche called these men free spirits. Kierkegaard called them knights of infinite resignation. Whatever the name, they are reclaiming what was stolen, not by others, but by the stories they were sold. The revolution isn't coming. It's already here. In the apartments where only one fork is used, in the gyms where eyes meet without a word, in libraries where fear and trembling finds its way into weathered hands. This isn't bitterness. This isn't defeat. It is the quiet rewriting of manhood. Kierkegaard's final entry in his journal, days before his death, was just one sentence. The truth is a trap. You cannot have it without being caught. And so here stands the modern man, not caught in failure, but in awakening, not stripped of love, but clothed in a deeper form of it, a love that begins not with another, but with the man he chose to become when no one was watching. That man is waiting, and this time he waits not for her, he waits for himself.